Let's put some of these ideas together. Let's look at the decisions that some of you are making right now or will be making in the future, whether it's next year or 3 years from now or 20 and 40 years from now. How do you make a decision, and what may be a helpful framework for identifying a self-concordant journey as well as outcome? And one of the ways to do it is by looking at the work of Amy Wrzesniewski that I do talk about in the work chapter, but still worth going over again, about work orientation. And this can apply not just to work. We can apply to other areas in our lives. Generally, what Wrzesniewski and others found is that people's perception of work can be classified into 3 categories. Some people perceive their work as a job, others as a career, and yet others, not the majority unfortunately, hopefully in the future the majority, some people perceive it as a calling. Primarily, it doesn't mean that the person who perceives his or her work as a calling does not sometimes experience it as a job. However, overall, they perceive their work as a calling versus a career versus a job. And you can distinguish them by looking at the following criteria. What motivates them? What keeps them going? What pushes and pulls them? What do they perceive work as? What is their interpretation of the workplace? What do they expect? What are they hoping for? And finally, what are they looking forward to in the future, in that work? So people who perceive their work as a job, motivation, paycheck at the end of the month or the end of the week. Work as something I have to do. It's a chore. I have no choice about it. What do they expect? Nothing much. They look forward to TGIF, or the holiday, the break, the end of the semester, the end of the 2-year period, or whatever it may be. The career perception, orientation. Money and advancement are what motivates these individuals, getting to the next stage. Work as, it's a race to the top. This is where the rat racers mostly reside. The expectation, more prestige, more power, more money, more prestige, more power. Again, advancement, attainment, achievement of the next goal. And they're looking forward to the next promotion. And this applies to different areas. It could be from pre-med to med school to internship at the best place to the chief head of the department to the chief of the hospital. It could be the race from being an analyst to an associate to a partner. It could be the race from being an assistant to an associate to a full professor. It can apply to any area, the rat race. The lucky few who perceive their work as calling, the motivation is the thing in itself. It's about a self-concordant goal. It's also about a self-concordant journey. How do they perceive work? It's a mission. It's a vocation. It's what they were meant to be doing. It's what they want to be doing more than anything else in the world. They see it not as a chore, but as a privilege to be engaged in what it is that they're doing. The expectations, their mission, a better world. And finally, what do they look forward to? More work where they can actualize themselves, where they can fulfill themselves, where they can be, to use the military cliche, all they can be. Now, when you look at this, it's mostly impossible to experience a sense of calling and mission and a self-concordant journey every hour of the day, just like it's not possible to be happy and to constantly and to experience that constant high. You know, for example, teaching is my calling. I certainly experience a sense of calling. It's the thing in itself. It's what I want to do professionally more than anything else in the world. At the same time, there are elements of teaching that I don't enjoy as much, and I do feel that I fall a little bit toward, well, this is my job, I have to do it. Such as going over my lecture notes 5 times before each lecture. The first time, pretty interesting. Second and third, it gets a little bit repetitive. But I know that if I want to produce a good and effective lecture, because that is my calling, teaching, I have to go over it many times. And I can tell the difference when I go over it once or twice versus 5 times. So that's important to me. But that part of my work, it is a chore, something that I have to do. However, remember the trickle effect, because overall, there is a sense of calling. Overall, it's a self-concordant goal, as well as journey. Even those parts are okay, not that bad. Or let's say you really enjoy a certain course. Let's take a hypothetical example, 1504. And another hypothetical example, you happen to have a midterm in a week. You may not enjoy every step of the way, going over the material for the second time or third time. However, if overall that experience is self-concordant, important to you, and you enjoy it, even that part will not be that bad. It will be okay. Especially if you start seeing that during that process you're beginning to make new connections, understand things, important things about yourself. The important thing also to keep in mind about calling is that while it does depend to some extent on the kind of work that you do, it depends much more on your perception of the work. So the research that I talk about in the book is about cleaners in a hospital who were able to see their work as a calling. Why? Because they interpreted their work not as, I have to pick up the garbage and clean the toilet, which they actually had to do, but more as, I'm taking care of these patients, because without my work, without me doing excellent work, there'd be more pollution and more people hurt in the hospital. And these people who perceived, these cleaners who perceived their work, had the calling orientation, were much more likely to engage in conversation with the patients in the hospital, were much more likely to help. And interestingly, many doctors from these same hospitals perceived their work as a job. Now, you are more likely, and again, not good, not bad, it is. You are more likely to find a sense of calling in your work if you're a leader versus the janitor or the cleaning person in an organization. It's more likely. However, that does not mean that the person who cleans the hospital cannot find a calling, and there are many examples. And the examples that Wrzesniewski talks about in the research are things such as comparing between cleaners and other cleaners, calling versus chore, between certain hairdressers who see their work as a chore versus ones who see it as a calling. And I'm sure you've had your hair cut with certain hairdressers who really do see it as a calling. I mean, there are more psychologists than hairdressers. Or engineers. Some just see their work, okay, I have to do this, that's all I think about, versus thinking about the bigger picture. I'm not just a cog in the mill, I'm part of an important project. We can perceive almost any work as falling into one of the 3 categories. Think about investment banking. I know many of you are going into investment banking. One of the ways to perceive investment banking is, I'm going there and I'm going to make a beep-load of money, and I'm going to have a great lifestyle. And that's an important motivation. Again, people aren't and shouldn't be impervious to the material comforts. That's okay. However, people who only look at that, who only look, okay, that's going to give me a great lifestyle. I'm going to send my kids to the best schools, which is a good thing, and I'm going to live in a beautiful neighborhood, a beautiful house, and a big car, and have a lot of prestige. Again, human nature, these needs. It's fine. But people who just look at these things will not be happy or will not live up to their potential of happiness in the long run. However, if I look at investment banking as that and also an opportunity to create jobs, which it does do. J.P. Morgan and all the investment bankers who came up after him have created millions and millions of jobs that would not have existed without investment banking. That investment banking is also about lubricating the wheels of the economy. That it will also provide me an opportunity to then go and contribute, whether it's financially or from my knowledge, to not-for-profit organizations. Because today what not-for-profit organizations need most is effective, sound, professional fiscal policies, which you learn as an investment banker or a consultant or whatever it is. Now, some people say, you're rationalizing if you're looking at investment banking as all these things. You're not rationalizing. You know what you're doing? You're simply looking at reality, at things that are real, that are there, they're not invented, but most people do not see them, just like most people did not see the children on the bus. And when you don't see something, as far as you're concerned, it doesn't exist. And for most investment bankers, they burn out because they don't also, not only, but they don't also see the positive components of that work, components that certainly can fall under a calling. Again, most works, whether it's working in a hospital and taking care of cleanliness, whether it's working as a medical doctor, whether it's working as an investment banker, as a teacher, as a volunteer, as a monk, whatever it is, can be perceived as a job, can be perceived as a career, and can be perceived as a calling. And very often the choice is up to you. How do you interpret it? Abraham Maslow. It is certainly true that many of us evade our constitutionally suggested vocation, call, destiny, task in life, mission. So often we run away from the responsibilities dictated, or rather suggested, by nature, by fate, even sometimes by accident, just as Jonah tried in vain to run away from his fate. What is your fate? What is your calling? What is your destiny? Just listen to the voice that suggests your vocation. Just listen to the call that guides you to your calling. What is it? You know, the problem is that we don't take time to think about these questions. Sometimes because we're afraid of the answer. Because what if it is teaching? You know, what about all the pressure that I feel from outside to go and be a consultant? Or what if it is investment banking? What about all the pressure that I hear from my friends and colleagues who say, well, you should do something else, more quote-unquote noble with your Harvard education? The most noble thing is to listen to that inner voice. Because when we pursue our passions, when we pursue a self-concordant goal and a self-concordant journey, that's when we come alive. And that's when we also make the world a better place. Remember Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. And if you want a happier world, begin with yourself. Easier said than done. But it's probably the most important question that you can ask of yourself. And by the way, the answer may change. It may be one thing today, it may be something different 2.5 years from now. And it may be very different 22.5 years from now or 50 years from now. But asking this question, when we really, truly ask this question, we open up possibilities and see things that we may have not seen before. Our, metaphorically speaking, children on the bus, our fate, our destiny, our vocation, our calling. think it was captured best, this whole idea, by one of the students who sat where you're sitting just 2 years ago, also one of the co-founders of Women in Business, Ebony Carter. Instead of focusing on what we can live with, we should be thinking about what we can't live without. What can't you live without? What are you about? Our next topic, related to goals, related to what we discussed last time, is something that I'm sure none of you can relate to, something that is completely foreign to you and your friends sitting around you, and that is not what I expected to come up on the screen. But soon we will get to that topic, I promise. So just a few, before we move on to that very important topic, I just wanted to build tension. It was all planned, of course. Before we get to that topic, just a few tips about setting goals. Some basic ones. First, write them down. Writing them down is making a commitment. Much more of a commitment than just saying them even. It's better to say them publicly than to say them just to ourselves or think about them, but writing them down makes a difference. A lot of research showing the effect of making plans, lists, and writing goals. Second, set lifelines. People talk about deadlines. Tammy, my wife, says, I think it's much more effective, much more useful to set lifelines. Dates by which we hope to achieve those certain goals. Why lifelines? Because goals, especially self-concordant goals, are about inspiring us. In other words, putting the spirit inside us. They're about making our life happier, more energetic. So lifelines, setting goals, very important. It's not, I will do the following soonish. It's, I will do the following by the 1st of July, 2009. Connected to this, make them specific. In other words, it's not, I'm going to improve sales pretty soon or very quickly, but rather, I'm going to increase sales 5% by December 31, 2008. Specific lifeline as well as specific project. Also, let's say I want to become fit. It's not just the generic, I want to become fitter. It's rather, I'm going to run 5 miles 4 times a week by October 15, 2008. Concrete, specific. Remember what we talked about. The most important thing about goals is not achieving those goals. It's not that that is what will make us happy or sad if we do or don't achieve them. The key is to energize us, to motivate us, to liberate us, to contribute as a means toward the end being the journey. The goals that facilitate the journey best are goals that we actually have, not all goals, but some goals, 50% of achieving. It's the goals such as Kennedy set in 1962. We'll reach the moon by the end of the decade, at the time when the metal that was necessary to withstand the heat of getting out of space and coming back to Earth was not even invented. It was at a time when they did not have the technology on numerous levels to land a person on the moon. And yet he declared that goal, that by the end of this decade we will do it. It energized NASA. Some people thought he was crazy, but it energized them. And you know that after 1969, NASA experienced a real drop in their motivation, in their passion, until essentially the mid-80s, because they didn't have a similar inspiring goal. We see it also on the individual level. and I talk about it in the book, where people had goals and then did not achieve these goals, or achieved these goals and did not set new goals. And they felt enervated and very often uninspired. Stretch goals. Alan Langer did the following research, bring in a group of people and introduce them to highly successful scientists and inventors. And then she asked them, these were world famous, world-class performers. And she asked these individuals, these students, to assess these very successful individuals and then to say, how likely are you to reach their level? And they assessed them extremely highly, they respected them, they admired them, and they said that they were unlikely to achieve that level. And then she brought a second group of students and she got them to look at the exact same individuals, same highly successful scientists, inventors, people who really made it, with one difference. She also introduced some of the characteristics of their path toward greatness. For example, failures on the way, insecurity, disappointments, hardships, and how they actually got from point A to point B. And then she asked them to evaluate them, and they respected them highly, just as much. And when she asked, how likely are you to achieve those goals? Much more likely. And as we know, beliefs are self-fulfilling prophecies. Number one predictor of long-term success, in addition, the John Cotter research, in addition to constantly asking questions, it's believing that you can do well. And if we only look at the outcome and not the journey, we're much less likely to believe that we can attain this outcome. Breaking down success. As Langer said, people can imagine themselves taking steps, while great heights seem entirely forbidden. Have a long-term goal, and then break it down to a shorter-term or a medium-term goal, short-term goal, and then make plans, and then create rituals based on these plans. Step by step, breaking down achievement, much more likely to believe that it's possible, and consequently much more likely to actually get there.